Blood pooled beneath Sophia Miller's fingernails as she clawed at the wooden door of Dr. Emerson's medical office, her face ashen with fever and desperation. "Please," she rasped, her throat raw from coughing through the night. "I can pay." But the door remained firmly shut. The small sign in the window turned to closed despite the early afternoon hour, and the doctor's shadowy figure visible through the curtained window. Greeley, Colorado in 1878 was not a place known for its mercy, particularly toward women with Sophia's reputation. At 24, she had survived more hardship than most men twice her age, though few in town would acknowledge her resilience. They saw only her past mistakes, not the woman who had fought to rebuild her life. "He ain't gonna see you, Miss Miller," called Mrs. Peterson from the general store porch across the dusty street. "Best be on your way before the Reverend comes by." The older woman's voice carried no sympathy, only the smug satisfaction of the righteous watching sinners suffer. Sophia stumbled back from the door, one hand pressed against her side where the pain had started 3 days ago, a sharp, insistent agony that had grown steadily worse. The fever had come yesterday, and by morning, the skin around the wound had turned an angry red with telltale lines spreading outward. The journey into town had nearly broken her. The small cabin where she'd been living these past 18 months was a 4-mile walk from Greeley. She'd made it through sheer determination, collapsing twice along the way. I said move along. The door had opened just enough for Dr. Emerson's face to appear, his features twisted with disgust. "We don't treat your kind here." "I'm dying," Sophia whispered, swaying on her feet. "Please." "Then do it elsewhere." The door slammed shut, the street swam before her eyes. Sophia knew she wouldn't make it back to her cabin. The stagecoach station had a bench. Perhaps she could rest there before. Before what? She had no answer as she stumbled forward, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. She didn't feel the impact when she hit the ground. Ryker Faulkner was not a man who spent much time in towns. At 32, he'd built a reputation as one of the most reliable cattle drivers in the Colorado Territory. His preference for wide open spaces and the company of his horse over most humans had served him well. Towns meant complications, saloons with card games he avoided, women he didn't have time for, and men looking to prove themselves against his 6'3" frame. But supplies were supplies, and even a man who preferred solitude needed coffee, ammunition, and occasionally, a proper cooked meal. So he found himself riding down Greeley's Main Street that afternoon, taking note of the cluster of townsfolk gathered around something or someone in front of the doctor's office. "What's the commotion?" he asked, pulling his chestnut gelding to a stop beside a young boy watching from the boardwalk. "That fallen woman, Miss Miller," the boy answered without looking up. "She collapsed. Ma says she's got the fever from her wicked ways." Ryker frowned. In his experience, fever came from wounds and illness, not moral failings. He dismounted, looping his horse's reins around a hitching post, and made his way through the small crowd. The woman lay crumpled in the dirt, her dark brown hair spilling from a simple bun, her calico dress stained with sweat and dust. No one was helping her. They stood in a circle, watching as if she were some kind of spectacle. "Has someone fetched the doctor?" Ryker asked, kneeling beside her. Heat radiated from her skin and her breathing came in shallow gasps. An older man spat tobacco juice into the street. "Doc won't see her. She's been told." Ryker looked up at the medical office, noting the doctor peering through the window. "Why the hell not? She's a fallen woman," a woman in a severe black dress informed him. "Worked at Miss Loretta's place up in Denver before coming here. Tried to pass herself off as respectable." Ryker's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of injustice in his years drifting across the frontier. "So you're all just going to stand here and watch her die in the street?" When no one answered, he slid his arms beneath the unconscious woman and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, he realized with concern. He could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. "Where's the doctor?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The door to the medical office opened, and a thin man with spectacles emerged onto the porch. "I've already explained to Miss Miller that I don't treat." "You'll treat her," Ryker interrupted, "or I'll make sure everyone in the Colorado Territory knows Dr. Emerson of Greeley lets women die in the street while he hides in his office." The doctor's face flushed. "Now see here, I'll pay triple your usual rate," Ryker said, climbing the steps with Sophia in his arms. "Triple in gold right now. But you will treat her and you'll do it properly." The crowd had gone silent, watching the confrontation with avid interest. The doctor glanced between Ryker's hard expression and the unconscious woman in his arms. "This isn't your concern, stranger," he said, though with less conviction. "I'm making it my concern." Ryker moved closer, his voice dropping so only the doctor could hear. "And if she dies because you refuse to treat her, I'll make that my concern too." Something in Ryker's eyes, perhaps the absolute certainty that he meant every word, made the doctor step aside. "Bring her in," he said curtly, "but I want payment first. You'll get half now, half when she's better." Ryker followed him inside, kicking the door shut on the murmuring crowd. The doctor's office was clean and well equipped, with an examination table in the center of the room and cabinets of medicines lining the walls. Ryker laid Sophia gently on the table, noting the way her breath hitched with pain even in unconsciousness. "What's wrong with her?" he asked. Dr. Emerson hesitated, then approached. "I haven't examined her." "Then do it now." The doctor's hands moved efficiently despite his reluctance. He checked her pulse, felt her forehead, lifted her eyelids. When he pressed on her right side, her unconscious form flinched violently. "Help me turn her," he said, professional curiosity evidently overcoming his moral objections. Together, they rolled Sophia onto her side, and the doctor lifted the back of her dress just enough to reveal an angry, infected wound at the base of her rib cage. "Knife wound," the doctor murmured. "Gone septic. She should have sought treatment days ago." Ryker bit back a retort about who was to blame for the delay. "Can you save her? Maybe." The doctor was already moving to his cabinets, pulling out bottles and instruments. "The infection's in her blood. I'll need to drain the wound, clean it thoroughly, and give her quinine for the fever." He glanced at Ryker. "She may still die, but you'll do your best." It wasn't a question, and the doctor didn't treat it as one. "I'll need hot water, clean towels. There's a pump out back." For the next hour, Ryker followed the doctor's instructions, bringing water, holding Sophia down when the pain of the treatment broke through her unconsciousness, and watching as Dr. Emerson worked with surprising skill. Whatever the man's failings in compassion, he knew his medicine. "Someone tried to kill her," the doctor said as he stitched the now clean wound. "This isn't a random injury. The angle suggests her attacker came from behind." Ryker frowned. "You know who she is. Any idea who might have wanted her dead?" "I don't concern myself with the affairs of—" "Don't," Ryker cut him off. "Just answer the question," the doctor sighed. "There are rumors she was involved with James Sullivan before his wedding to the banker's daughter. Sullivan has a temper. But it could have been anyone who thought they were defending the town's morality." "Some morality," Ryker muttered. When the doctor had finished, Sophia lay pale but breathing more evenly on the table, her wound cleaned, stitched, and bandaged, her fever slightly reduced by the medicines Dr. Emerson had administered. "She needs rest, clean water, and regular doses of this." The doctor handed Ryker a small bottle, 2 drops every 4 hours, and the wound needs to be cleaned and rebandaged daily. Where can she stay? Ryker asked. I assume she doesn't have family here. The doctor's expression soured again. The only place that would take her is Miss Watson's boarding house at the edge of town. She's a Quaker, less concerned with moral standing. Ryker nodded, reaching into his saddlebag for a leather pouch. He counted out gold coins, pushing them across the desk. Half now, as agreed. The rest when she's recovered. She'll need to be carried to the boarding house. I'll take her. Ryker carefully gathered Sophia into his arms again. Just point me in the right direction. The doctor seemed relieved to be rid of them both. End of Main Street, turn right. Small white house with a blue door. Ryker paused at the door. Your name's going to be mud in this town when word gets out you treated her. Dr. Emerson's smile was thin. For triple my usual rate, I can weather a few disapproving looks in church. Outside, the crowd had dispersed, though Ryker felt eyes watching from windows as he carried Sophia down the street to where his horse waited patiently. With some difficulty, he mounted while holding her, arranging her across his lap as gently as possible. Easy now, he murmured, though whether to the horse or the unconscious woman he couldn't have said. Miss Watson's boarding house was exactly as described, a modest white clapboard building with a blue door and neatly tended flower boxes beneath the windows. Ryker managed to knock awkwardly while still holding Sophia. The woman who answered was in her 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and kind eyes that took in the situation at a glance. I was wondering when someone would finally bring her to me, she said, stepping back to allow them entry. I've had a room ready since I heard she was ill. People in this town talk plenty, even when they do nothing. Ryker followed her upstairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. He laid Sophia carefully on the bed. I paid Dr. Emerson to treat her, he explained. But she'll need someone to look after her while she recovers. I can pay for her board and care. Miss Watson studied him with shrewd eyes. You know her? No, madam. Yet you paid for her treatment and now her lodging. Ryker shifted uncomfortably. It seemed like the right thing to do. The older woman's face softened. Then you're a rarer creature in these parts than you realize, Mr. Faulkner, Ryker Faulkner. Well, Mr. Faulkner, you can set your mind at ease. I'll care for Miss Miller. I've nursed my share of fevers in my time. She glanced at Sophia. But you should know when she wakes she's likely to be confused, frightened. A familiar face might help. I'm just passing through, he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true anymore. Something about the woman on the bed, and the town that had abandoned her, had tangled in his thoughts like barbed wire. Miss Watson seemed to read his indecision. Well, the room next to hers is vacant if you find yourself delayed in your travels. Ryker hesitated, then nodded. I'll take it, at least for tonight. I should be here when she wakes up. She'll have questions. Indeed she will. Miss Watson moved to the bed, gently brushing Sophia's hair from her forehead. Poor child, she's had a difficult road. You know her story, pieces of it. Enough to know she deserves more kindness than she's been shown. She turned back to Ryker. I'll bring up some hot water and clean cloths. If you're staying, you might as well make yourself useful. Ryker found himself smiling for the first time that day. Yes, madam. Night had fallen by the time Sophia showed signs of waking. Ryker had spent the evening alternating between sitting in the chair by her bed and pacing the small room, occasionally stepping out to check on his horse, which he'd stabled behind the boarding house. Miss Watson had brought food, a simple but hearty stew and fresh bread, which he'd eaten distractedly, his attention never far from the woman on the bed. When Sophia's eyelids finally fluttered, Ryker leaned forward, uncertain what to say but knowing he should be the first thing she saw, rather than waking alone in a strange room. Her eyes opened fully deep brown, he noted, like rich coffee, and immediately widened with fear. She tried to sit up, gasping in pain at the movement. "Easy," Ryker said, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're safe. You're at Miss Watson's boarding house." Sophia stared at him, confusion replacing fear. "Who?" Her voice cracked and she swallowed with difficulty. "Here." He helped her take a sip of water from the glass on the bedside table. "My name's Ryker Faulkner. I found you outside the doctor's office when you collapsed." She drank gratefully, then sank back against the pillow. "Dr. Emerson wouldn't treat me. He did in the end. I can be persuasive." Ryker set the glass down. "How's the pain? Bearable?" Sophia's gaze was wary, assessing. "Why did you help me?" The question was direct, unadorned with gratitude or pleasantries. Ryker appreciated that, because no one else was going to. She closed her eyes briefly. "And what do you want in return, Mr. Faulkner?" The question struck him like a physical blow. What kind of life had she lived that she immediately assumed his help came with a price? But even as he thought it, he knew the answer. The kind of life that led a town to leave her dying in the street. "Nothing," he said firmly. "Just for you to recover." Sophia's expression made it clear she didn't believe him, but she was too weak to argue. "The wound, knife wound in your back. Doctor cleaned and stitched it, but the infection had already spread. You'll need rest and medicine to recover fully." She nodded slightly, her eyelids growing heavy again. "Thank you," she murmured, the words slurring as she drifted back to sleep. Ryker settled back in his chair, prepared for a long night. Outside the window, Greeley slept, unaware that something in the fabric of its carefully maintained social order had begun to unravel. The next 3 days established a rhythm. Sophia would wake for brief periods, during which Miss Watson or Ryker would help her drink water or broth and take her medicine. The fever persisted, though less severely, and the infection gradually retreated from her bloodstream. On the 4th morning, Ryker entered her room to find her fully awake and sitting up against the pillows. Some color returned to her cheeks. "You're still here," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. He set down the tray of breakfast Miss Watson had prepared. "Said I would be." "Most people say a lot of things." Sophia smoothed the blanket over her lap, a nervous gesture that betrayed her discomfort. "Miss Watson says you've paid for my room and care." It seemed simpler that way. Her eyes, clearer now without the haze of fever, studied him. "Nothing about this is simple, Mr. Faulkner. A stranger pays for my medical care, my lodging, stays by my bedside for days. People will talk. Let them." Ryker pulled the chair closer to her bed. "Can you eat something more substantial today? Miss Watson made eggs and toast." Sophia's expression softened slightly. "I can try." She accepted the plate he offered, her hands steadier than they had been. "You never answered my question properly. Why are you doing this?" Ryker considered her for a long moment. "I've spent most of my life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to get tangled in other people's business. It's simpler that way." He paused. "But sometimes you see something so wrong you can't just ride past. And I was that wrong thing." There was no self-pity in her voice, only a tired acceptance. "The way they treated you was wrong," he corrected. "I don't know you, Miss Miller. Don't know what brought you to Greeley or what you did before. Don't need to know. But you're curious." It wasn't a question. Human nature to wonder. He shrugged. "But it's your story to tell or keep." Sophia took a small bite of toast, chewing thoughtfully. "You're an unusual man, Mr. Faulkner. Just Ryker is fine." "Ryker." She tested the name. "Then you should call me Sophia." She set the plate aside, having managed only a few bites. "I should tell you, Your reputation in town is likely suffering by association with me. Don't have much of a reputation to worry about. Everyone has something to lose." Ryker thought about his solitary life, the cattle drives, the nights under stars with only his horse and occasionally a partner or two for company. Not me. Sophia's smile was small but genuine. Then you're even more unusual than I thought. Over the next week, as Sophia's strength gradually returned, they fell into a pattern. Ryker would bring her meals, sit with her while she ate what she could, and they would talk. At first, the conversations were superficial: the weather, news Miss Watson brought from town, books Sophia had read. But gradually, the silences between them grew comfortable, and the discussions deeper. Ryker told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to influenza when he was 17, and drifting west afterward. He described cattle drives along the Goodnight-Loving Trail, the stars over the plains of Texas, the mountains of Colorado in winter. In return, Sophia shared carefully edited versions of her past. She'd grown up in Boston, the daughter of a merchant who lost everything in the Panic of 1873. At 19, with no prospects and no family after her parents' deaths, she traveled west with a man who'd promised marriage but delivered abandonment instead. And then, Ryker asked one evening when her story paused after her arrival in Denver. "And then I did what I had to survive," she said quietly. "The parts the town knows about or thinks they know." Ryker nodded, not pressing further. "How did you end up in Greeley?" "I saved enough to leave that life behind. Came here 18 months ago, bought a small cabin outside town, took in sewing and laundry." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. I thought if I worked hard enough, lived quietly enough, people might eventually see me as something other than my past." Some people can't see past their own judgment to the person standing in front of them. "And you?" Her eyes met his. "What do you see when you look at me?" The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been between a rescuer and the woman he'd helped. Ryker realized with a start that somewhere in the past week, Sophia Miller had ceased to be a duty and become something else, someone whose thoughts he valued, whose rare smile he found himself working to earn, whose strength in the face of the town's cruelty he admired. "I see someone trying to build a life on her own terms," he said finally. "Someone stronger than most men I've known." Color touched her cheeks and she looked away. "The doctor is coming tomorrow to remove the stitches. After that, I should be able to return to my cabin." The thought of her alone in a cabin miles from town, still weak from her illness, with someone who had tried to kill her potentially still out there, made Ryker's jaw tighten. That might not be wise just yet. "I can't impose on Miss Watson's charity indefinitely." "It's not charity if I'm paying," he pointed out. "And I can't impose on your generosity indefinitely either." Sophia's voice was firm. "You've already done more than anyone could expect. You must have business elsewhere, cattle to drive, places to be." He did have a contract waiting, a herd needed moving from a ranch south of Denver to Wyoming territory. The job would wait a few more days, but not indefinitely. "At least let me help you get settled back at your place," he said. "Make sure it's secure, that you have supplies." Sophia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "That would be kind, thank you." Dr. Emerson arrived the next morning, his manner brisk and professional as he examined the wound. "Good healing," he pronounced. "No signs of continued infection." He removed the stitches with quick, practiced movements, then rebandaged the area. "Keep it clean for another week. No heavy lifting or strenuous activity for at least a month." "Thank you, doctor," Sophia said quietly. The doctor barely acknowledged her words, turning instead to Ryker. "I believe you owe me the remainder of my fee." Ryker counted out the gold coins, adding one extra. For your discretion, he said pointedly. Dr. Emerson pocketed the money with a thin smile. Good day, Mr. Faulkner. He nodded curtly to Sophia. Miss Miller. After he left, Sophia sighed. That's the most civil he's ever been to me, and only because you were here. People respect money and strength, Ryker said. Not necessarily in that order. And which do you have more of? She asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Definitely not money. His answering smile came easier than it once had. When would you like to return to your cabin? Tomorrow, if Miss Watson can spare the wagon. I'll arrange it. True to his word, the next morning found Ryker helping Sophia into Miss Watson's small wagon. The older woman had packed a basket of food and medicines, pressing it into Sophia's hands with firm instructions to rest and heal. You're welcome back any time, dear, Miss Watson said, embracing Sophia gently. For a visit or to stay. Thank you for everything, Sophia replied, her voice thick with emotion. I won't forget your kindness. Ryker drove the wagon with his horse tied behind. Sophia directed him out of town and along a narrow dirt road that wound through stands of pine trees. The late June morning was warm but pleasant, the sky a clear, endless blue above the distant mountains. It's beautiful country, Ryker commented, breaking a comfortable silence. That's why I chose it, Sophia said. After years in cities Boston, then Denver, I wanted space and quiet. She pointed ahead. It's just around this bend. The cabin came into view, a small but solid structure built against a backdrop of tall pines. A narrow creek ran nearby, and a small vegetable garden, now overgrown after days of neglect, stretched along one side. You built this yourself? Ryker asked, impressed. No, Sophia laughed. I bought it from a trapper who was moving north, but I've maintained it, added the garden. Her face clouded slightly. It's not much, but it's mine. Ryker helped her from the wagon, noting how she still moved carefully to avoid pulling at her healing wound. He tied up the horses and carried her belongings inside. The cabin's interior was simple but meticulously clean, with a small iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves holding more books than Ryker would have expected. Colorful quilts and curtains softened the rustic space, giving it a warmth that spoke of the effort Sophia had put into making it a home. Let me check around outside, he said, setting down her bag. Make sure everything's secure. While Sophia rested, Ryker examined the cabin's exterior and surrounding area. He repaired a loose shutter, chopped a week's worth of firewood, and cleared the worst of the weeds from her garden. The vegetables, beans, carrots, and potatoes were salvageable with some care. When he returned inside, he found Sophia at the table, a ledger open before her. Calculating something, he asked, washing his hands in the basin by the door. My finances. She closed the book with a sigh. Being ill has put me behind. I had orders for mending and laundry that I couldn't complete. I can leave you some money, Ryker offered, sitting across from her. No, her response was immediate and firm. You've done more than enough. It's not charity, Sophia, it's what payment, for what service exactly? Her chin lifted, a flash of fire in her eyes. Ryker leaned back, recognizing the pride that had helped her survive. A loan, then. You can repay it when you're back on your feet. She hesitated, then shook her head. I've spent the past 2 years trying to stand on my own. I can't go back to depending on someone else's generosity, especially a man's. Her expression softened slightly. But thank you for understanding why I need to refuse. Ryker nodded, respecting her decision even as he worried about how she would manage. At least let me bring you supplies before I leave. Food, medicines. To his relief, she agreed to this compromise. When do you have to go? I should head for Denver within the next few days. I have a contract for a cattle drive starting next week. Of course. Was that disappointment in her eyes, or just his imagination? You've already delayed your work too long on my account. It was worth it, he said simply. The words hung between them, laden with meanings neither was ready to examine too closely. That evening they shared a simple meal of stew made from Miss Watson's provisions. Afterward, as twilight gathered outside, Sophia lit a lantern and offered Ryker one of her books. "You can take it with you," she said, "for the trail." It was a volume of Thoreau's Walden, well worn but carefully kept. "I can't take your book, please, as a thank you." She pressed it into his hands. "You can return it someday if our paths cross again." "They will," he said with more certainty than he felt. "I'll be back this way after the cattle drive." Sophia's smile was tinged with gentle skepticism. "The road takes us where it will, Ryker. I've learned not to count on promises of return. I'm not in the habit of making promises I don't keep." She studied him for a long moment. "No, I don't believe you are." The next morning, Ryker made a trip into town for supplies. He bought flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, and dried bean staples that would last. At the general store, he also purchased the medicines Dr. Emerson had prescribed, ignoring Mrs. Peterson's disapproving stare as she wrapped his purchases. "Taking these out to the Miller woman?" she asked, her tone making the question an accusation. "Yes, madam. You should know, Mr. Faulkner, the kind of woman you're involving yourself with." Ryker met her gaze steadily. "I know exactly what kind of woman Miss Miller is. Do you?" Mrs. Peterson drew herself up. "I know she lived a life of sin in Denver before coming here to deceive honest folk." "Seems to me," Ryker said, keeping his voice level, "that a woman trying to build an honest life deserves more Christian charity than she's been shown in this town." "Well, I never know, madam. I don't believe you have." He tipped his hat and gathered his purchases. "Good day." When he returned to the cabin, he found Sophia outside, carefully tending to her garden despite her injury. She looked up at his approach, shielding her eyes against the sun, and for a moment, the sight of her kneeling among the green plants, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, struck him with unexpected force. "You shouldn't be working yet," he said, dismounting. "I was going stir-crazy inside." She accepted his hand to help her up, her fingers warm in his. "Besides, the beans won't wait for me to heal completely." Ryker unloaded the supplies, arranging them on her shelves according to her directions. When everything was stored away, he found himself reluctant to broach the subject of his departure. "I should be on my way tomorrow," he finally said as they sat outside the cabin in the late afternoon light. "The cattle drive can't wait much longer." Sophia nodded, her face carefully neutral. "Of course. Will you be all right here alone?" "I've been alone most of my life, Ryker. I know how to manage." "That's not what I asked." She sighed, looking out at the trees. "I'll be fine. The wound is healing well. I have supplies now, thanks to you. In a week or so, I'll be strong enough to take in laundry again." "And whoever attacked you," her hand unconsciously went to her side. "I don't know who it was. It was dark. I never saw their face. Just felt the knife and heard a man's voice say, 'Whores don't belong in decent towns.'" Ryker's hands clenched. "That narrows it down to half the men in Greeley. It doesn't matter now. It matters if they try again." Sophia turned to him, her expression resolute. "I have a rifle inside. I know how to use it. I'm not helpless, Ryker." He believed her. In the short time he'd known her, he'd seen enough of her strength and resilience to know she was a survivor. But the thought of leaving her alone still sat uneasily with him. "I'll come back," he said abruptly. "After the drive. 6 weeks, maybe 7. Her smile was sad but genuine. "Don't make promises the trail might not let you keep." "It's not a promise, it's a statement of fact." He reached out, surprising himself by taking her hand. "I'll come back, Sophia." For a moment she allowed the contact, her fingers curling slightly around his. Then she gently withdrew. "I should start supper." That night, their last meal together was quiet, filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts. When it was time to sleep, Ryker insisted on taking a blanket outside, despite Sophia's protests that he could use the cabin's small settee. "I prefer the stars," he told her. "Sleep well, Sophia." Under the vast Colorado sky, Ryker found sleep elusive. His thoughts kept returning to the woman inside the cabin, her quiet dignity, her determination to rebuild her life. The rare moments when her guard dropped, and he glimpsed the person she might have been before life hardened her. He'd known her barely 2 weeks, yet the thought of riding away left him oddly hollow. In his 32 years, he'd never felt this reluctance to move on, this pull to stay in one place, or more accurately, with one person. Dawn found him already awake, packing his few belongings onto his horse. Sophia emerged from the cabin as the first golden light touched the trees, a cup of coffee in her hands. "For the road," she said, offering it to him. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Ryker found himself wishing for a reason to prolong the moment. "I put some biscuits in your saddlebag," Sophia added. "Not much, but something for breakfast. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." She hugged her shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Safe travels, Ryker." He mounted his horse, looking down at her. In the early light, with her hair loose and her face turned up to his, she was beautiful in a way that went beyond mere appearance, a beauty born of strength and survival. 6 weeks, he said. "Less if I can manage it." Sophia's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "The cabin will still be here." "And you, where else would I go?" She stepped back. "Goodbye, Ryker." He tipped his hat, then turned his horse toward the trail. At the bend in the road, he looked back once. Sophia still stood where he'd left her, a solitary figure framed by the cabin and pines beyond. He raised his hand in a final farewell, then rode on, the mountains calling him forward even as something stronger pulled him back. The weeks that followed were filled with the familiar rhythm of the cattle drive, dusty days pushing reluctant beeves across the Wyoming territory. Nights around campfires with the other drovers, the constant vigilance against stampedes, rustlers, and bad weather. It was the life Ryker knew best, the work that had defined him for years, yet for the first time it felt incomplete. He found himself pulling out Sophia's copy of Walden during quiet evenings, his rough fingers careful with the delicate pages. Her name was inscribed inside the cover in an elegant hand, Sophia Miller. And sometimes he traced the letters, wondering about the woman who had made her way from Boston society to a humble cabin in the Colorado wilderness. The drive finished earlier than expected, with good weather and minimal trouble from the herd. Ryker collected his pay in Cheyenne, turned down an offer for another job starting immediately, and headed south toward Colorado. The journey that would normally have taken him 10 days, he made in 7, pushing himself and his horse with an urgency he didn't fully understand. It was late afternoon when he finally approached Sophia's cabin, the August sun casting long shadows through the pines. From a distance, everything looked as he remembered the small structure nestled among the trees, smoke rising from the chimney, the garden now flourishing stretching along one side. Relief washed over him. She was still here, still safe. He hadn't realized how much he'd worried until that moment. As he drew closer, however, he noticed a horse he didn't recognize tied outside a fine bay gelding with expensive tack. Visitors were rare this far from town, and unease prickled along Ryker's spine. He approached cautiously, dismounting at the edge of the clearing. Voices drifted from inside the cabin, Sophia's and a man's. The tone was heated, though the words were indistinct. Ryker moved to the window, peering in through a gap in the curtains. Sophia stood with her back to the stove, her posture rigid. Facing her was a well-dressed man in his 30s, his handsome features twisted with anger. "Can't just disappear, Sophia," the man was saying. "People are talking. My father-in-law is asking questions." "That's hardly my concern, James," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite her evident tension. "Our arrangement ended over a year ago, as you well know. And then you show up in my town, flaunting yourself. I came here to start over," Sophia cut him off. "I've done nothing to draw attention to our past. I've lived quietly, bothered no one. Your very presence is a threat." The man James moved closer to her. "Elizabeth suspects something. If she ever found out, she won't hear it from me." Sophia held her ground. "I've kept your secret for 18 months, James. I'll continue to keep it. But I won't leave my home because you lack the courage to face your own choices." James's hand shot out, gripping Sophia's arm. "You call this a home? This pathetic cabin in the middle of nowhere? You could have had so much more if you'd just been reasonable. Let go of me." Sophia's voice was low, dangerous. Ryker had seen enough. He pushed open the door, stepping into the cabin with the quiet authority that had served him well in confrontations with drunk cowboys and would-be rustlers. "The lady asked you to let go," he said. Both heads turned toward him. James's expression shifted from anger to confusion while relief flooded Sophia's features. "Ryker," she breathed. "Who the hell are you?" James demanded, releasing Sophia's arm but not backing away. "A friend," Ryker replied evenly. "And you, James Sullivan," the man said, drawing himself up. "I have private business with Miss Miller. Seems like your business is concluded." Ryker moved further into the room, positioning himself between James and Sophia. "I believe it's time for you to leave." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. When a man puts his hands on a woman in anger, it becomes my concern." For a moment, Sullivan seemed to consider challenging him. Then, apparently thinking better of it, he reached for his hat. "This isn't over, Sophia." "Yes, it is," she said firmly. "Don't come here again, James." Sullivan pushed past Ryker, pausing at the door. "My father-in-law is on the town council. One word from me and they could make life very difficult for you." His gaze flicked to Ryker. "For both of you." "Get on your horse, Sullivan," Ryker said quietly, "while you still can." With a final glare, Sullivan left. Moments later, they heard hoofbeats fading into the distance. Sophia leaned against the stove, the tension visibly draining from her body. "You're back early. The drive went well." Ryker moved to the window, watching until Sullivan was out of sight. "Was that him? The man from Denver?" she nodded, rubbing her arm where James had gripped it. "He was engaged to Elizabeth Thornton, the banker's daughter, when I met him. I didn't know that at first. By the time I found out, I was." She trailed off. "You don't have to explain," Ryker said. "I think I do." Sophia straightened. "James set me up in a small house in Denver, not as his wife, obviously, but he took care of me. When he married Elizabeth and moved to Greeley, he expected me to stay in Denver, to be available whenever he visited." Her voice hardened. "I refused. I'd saved enough to start over, to leave that life behind. So I came here as far from Denver as I could afford, not realizing it was where he lived. And when he discovered you were here, he was furious, threatened me, tried to pay me to leave." She shook her head. "I refused again. This is my home, Ryker. I won't be driven from it." Ryker's mind went back to the knife wound, the words her attacker had spoken. Was it him? "The night you were attacked," Sophia hesitated. "I don't know for certain. The voice was similar, but I can't prove it was James." "You don't need proof for me to believe you." She looked up at him, surprise and something warmer flickering in her eyes. No, I suppose I don't. She moved to the table, straightening items that didn't need straightening. You really are back early. I said I would be. Yes, you did. A small smile touched her lips. Are you hungry? I was about to make supper when James arrived. Starving, Ryker admitted. Trail food gets tiresome. Like that, they fell back into the easy rhythm they'd established during his earlier stay. Sophia prepared a simple but satisfying meal of beans, cornbread, and fresh vegetables from her garden. Ryker told her about the cattle drive, the characters he'd met along the way, the vast Wyoming skies. She spoke of her garden success, a blue ribbon she'd won at the small county fair for her quilting, the books she'd read in his absence. Neither mentioned James Sullivan again that evening, though his presence lingered like a shadow in the corners of the cabin. As night fell, Ryker once again insisted on sleeping outside despite Sophia's protests. I've spent the past 6 weeks under the stars, he told her. One more night won't hurt me. Later, as he lay on his bedroll listening to the night sounds of the forest, Ryker found his thoughts returning to Sullivan. The man's threats hadn't been idle. As the son-in-law of a prominent banker and council member, he had the power to make Sophia's already difficult life in Greeley nearly impossible. And if he had been the one to attack her that night, Ryker's jaw tightened. He'd returned to check on Sophia, to ensure she was healing properly, to fulfill his promise. But now he found himself reluctant to leave again, knowing the danger that remained. Morning brought no clarity. Over breakfast, Ryker broached the subject carefully. Have you thought about moving somewhere else? Not because of Sullivan's threats, he added quickly when Sophia's expression hardened, but for a fresh start where people don't already have their minds made up about you. Like where? She asked, her tone more curious than defensive. There are new settlements further west, places where people are too busy building their own lives to worry about judging others. Sophia considered this, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. I've thought about it, she admitted, but it takes money to relocate, to start over yet again. And despite everything, I've put down roots here. She gestured around the cabin. This is the first place that's ever truly been mine. Ryker understood. After a lifetime of drifting, he recognized the powerful pull of having something to call your own, something worth defending. What about you? Sophia asked. Where are you headed next? It was the question he'd been avoiding. Normally by now, he'd be seeking his next contract, planning his route to wherever cattle needed driving. The open trail had always called to him louder than any place or person. I'm not sure, he said honestly. I have some savings. Thought I might stay in the area for a while. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. Oh, any particular reason? The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Ryker had never been a man of many words, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But something about Sophia Miller made him want to try. I find I'm not as eager to move on as I used to be, he said carefully. A faint blush colored Sophia's cheeks. Greeley's not much of a town for a man like you. It's not the town I'm interested in staying near. Her eyes met his, questioning, hopeful, and wary all at once. Ryker, a sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever she had been about to say. They both tensed, Ryker's hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Miss Miller, a woman's voice called. It's Margaret Watson. Sophia relaxed, moving to open the door. Miss Watson, what a surprise. The boarding house owner stood on the threshold, her expression grave. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I felt I should warn you. Her eyes moved past Sophia to Ryker. Both of you. What's happened? Sophia asked, inviting the older woman inside. James Sullivan has been to see Sheriff Collins, Miss Watson said without preamble. He's accusing Mr. Faulkner of threatening him and you, Miss Miller, of improper relations with his clients from Denver. Sophia paled. That's absurd. Of course it is, Miss Watson agreed. But Sullivan's father-in-law holds the mortgage on half the businesses in town, including the sheriff's ranch. People will listen. Is the sheriff coming out here? Ryker asked. Not yet. But there's talk of a town meeting tonight to discuss the moral character of the community. Miss Watson's disgust at the notion was evident. It's a thinly veiled excuse to force you out, Miss Miller, and now Mr. Faulkner as well. Sophia's hands twisted in her apron. I've done nothing wrong. I've lived quietly, bothered no one. Unfortunately, that matters little to men like Sullivan and his father-in-law. Miss Watson took Sophia's hands in hers. I came to offer you a place at my home until this blows over. Both of you, she added, glancing at Ryker. Thank you, but I won't be driven from my home by lies, Sophia said firmly. I've run before, I won't run again. Ryker moved to stand beside her. I'm not leaving either. Miss Watson nodded, unsurprised by their refusal. Then be prepared. Sullivan is spreading his poison through town as we speak, and he has powerful allies. After Miss Watson left, Sophia stood by the window, gazing out at her garden with troubled eyes. You should go, she said quietly. This isn't your fight. I've never been one to abandon a friend when trouble's coming, Ryker replied. She turned to face him. That's just it, Ryker. By staying, you're risking your reputation, possibly your livelihood. Cattle barons won't hire a drover with a tarnished name. Let me worry about that. I can't ask you to sacrifice your future for me. You're not asking, I'm choosing. He moved closer, closing the distance between them. Sophia, I've spent my life avoiding entanglements, keeping to myself. It was simpler that way, safer. And now I find I don't want simple or safe anymore. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that surprised even him. I want to stay, if you'll have me. Sophia's breath caught. As what? It was a fair question. What was he offering? Friendship? Protection? Something more. The answer came to him with surprising clarity. As whatever you'll allow me to be, he said honestly. I care for you, Sophia, more than I expected to, more than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. Tears gathered in her eyes. You hardly know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and proud and determined. I know you've survived things that would break most people. I know when I rode away from here, all I could think about was coming back. A tear slipped down her cheek. And when you learn the rest, the details of my past that would make even a man like you turn away, there's nothing in your past that could change what I feel now. Ryker took her hands in his. We've all done things we regret, Sophia. It's what we choose to do next that matters. For a long moment she searched his face, looking for hesitation or deceit and finding neither. Then, with a small sob, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. I've been alone so long, she whispered. I'm afraid to believe this is real. Ryker's arms encircled her, holding her gently. It's real, he murmured into her hair, and you're not alone anymore. They stood like that for several minutes, the morning sun streaming through the window, bathing them in golden light. When Sophia finally pulled back, there was a new resolve in her eyes. If we're going to face this together, she said, there are things you need to know, the full truth about my past. Only if you want to tell me, she nodded. I do, no more secrets between us. Over the next hour, sitting at her small table, Sophia told her story from the beginning, her sheltered upbringing in Boston, her father's financial ruin and subsequent suicide, her mother's death from grief shortly after. At 19, alone and destitute, she had accepted an offer from a charming man who promised to take her west and marry her. He abandoned me in St. Louis with no money and no connections, she said, her voice steady despite the pain of the memories. I tried to find respectable work but without references or family. Well, you can imagine how that went. Ryker nodded, his expression somber but non-judgmental. I met a woman who owned a house in Denver. Not a common brothel, Sophia clarified, but a place that catered to wealthy men seeking companionship. She offered me a position, room and board protection. At the time, it seemed like my only option. She described the 3 years she spent there, how she had determined from the start to save every penny, to eventually buy her freedom and a piece of land far from cities and the men who frequented them. James Sullivan became my regular patron, she continued. He was generous, less demanding than some. When he told me he was moving to Greeley, he offered to set me up in my own house in Denver to visit whenever he pleased. But by then, I had saved enough to leave that life behind completely. She smiled wryly. Imagine my shock when I arrived in Greeley, thinking I'd found a quiet place to start over, only to discover it was where James had settled with his new bride. He threatened you even then, he was furious. Said I was deliberately trying to ruin him. When I refused to leave, he began spreading rumors about my past. Not directly, he couldn't afford to have his own connection to me revealed but through whispers, insinuations. And the attack. Sophia's hand went to her side, where the wound had healed into a jagged scar. 3 months ago, James came to the cabin, drunk and angry. His wife had heard rumors, was asking questions. He demanded I leave Greeley immediately. When I refused again, he stormed out, threatening that I would regret my stubbornness. That night, she nodded. I can't prove it was him. The attacker came from behind. I never saw his face clearly, but the voice, the timing. Who else would have reason to want me gone so desperately? Ryker's jaw tightened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. Thank you for telling me. Now you know everything. Sophia looked down at their still joined hands. I would understand if you wanted to reconsider. I don't, he interrupted firmly. Nothing you've told me changes how I feel. She looked up, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. How can you say that? Most men, I'm not most men. Ryker squeezed her hands. And you're not the person you were in Denver any more than I'm the angry boy who left Missouri after burying his parents. We've both been shaped by our pasts, but they don't define us. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes again, but this time she was smiling through them. No, she agreed softly, they don't. The rest of the day passed in preparation for whatever might come. Ryker checked and cleaned his guns, repaired a loose board on the porch and reinforced the cabin's door. Sophia baked bread, an activity she said always calmed her nerves, and gathered vegetables from the garden. As evening approached, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air was warm, fragrant with pine and the approaching autumn. Whatever happens, Sophia said, breaking a comfortable silence, I want you to know these past weeks having you here have meant more to me than I can say. Ryker took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. We'll face whatever comes together. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. Together, she repeated, the word a promise. Ryker leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose. Instead, Sophia met him halfway, her lips soft against his in a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and possibilities neither had dared imagine before. The sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Ryker pulled back, standing quickly and moving Sophia behind him, as 5 riders appeared on the trail leading to the cabin. Sheriff Collins led the group, his expression grim beneath his gray mustache. Behind him rode James Sullivan, his father-in-law Thornton, and 2 other men Ryker didn't recognize. Stay inside, he told Sophia quietly. No, she stood firm beside him. This is my home. I'll face them with you. The riders halted in the clearing before the cabin. Sheriff Collins dismounted first, adjusting his gun belt as he approached. "Mr. Faulkner," he called. "Miss Miller." "Sheriff," Ryker acknowledged. "This is private property, I'm aware." Collins looked uncomfortable but determined. "I'm here on official business. There have been complaints." "I'll bet there have," Sophia said, her eyes fixed on Sullivan, who remained on his horse, a smug expression on his handsome face. "Mr. Sullivan has made serious allegations," Collins continued. "Claims of threats against his person and concerning Miss Miller's professional activities." "That's a lie," Ryker said flatly. "Be that as it may, the town council has convened an emergency meeting tonight to discuss the matter. As sheriff, I'm obliged to escort you both to attend. And if we decline your invitation?" Sophia asked, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. Thornton, a portly man with hard eyes, spoke up from his horse. "Then the council will proceed without hearing your defense, Miss Miller. The outcome would be unfortunate for you." "Meaning you'd find a reason to seize my property," Sophia concluded. "Or worse." "The council is concerned with public morality," Sullivan interjected smoothly. "Certain elements are deemed undesirable for a growing community like Greeley." Ryker's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Sophia's touch on his arm stopped him. "Violence won't solve this," she murmured. She was right, he knew. They were outnumbered, and even if they could fight their way out of this confrontation, it would only delay the inevitable. Greeley wasn't a frontier boom town where disputes were settled with bullets. It was an established community with laws, however selectively applied. "We'll come to your meeting," Sophia announced, her chin high. "But I want Miss Watson present as a witness." Sheriff Collins nodded, relief evident in his expression. "That seems reasonable. And we'll ride in ourselves," Ryker added. "No need for an escort." After some argument, particularly from Sullivan and Thornton, this condition was also accepted. The men would ride ahead to convene the meeting, and Ryker and Sophia would follow within the hour. As the riders departed, Sophia leaned against the porch railing, her composure finally cracking. "They're going to run me out of town," she whispered. "Not if I can help it," Ryker said grimly. "What can we do against men like Thornton? They control everything in Greeley, the bank, the council, even the sheriff." Ryker considered this. "What if we could prove Sullivan attacked you? That would change things." "How? It's been months and I never saw my attacker's face clearly." "But Sullivan has a motive, a strong one, if his wife and father-in-law learned about his past with you." Sophia's eyes widened as she caught his meaning. "You're suggesting we threaten to expose him? That's dangerous, Ryker. Men like Sullivan don't respond well to blackmail." "Not blackmail. The truth." Ryker paced the porch. "If Sullivan is behind this attempt to run you out of town, it's because he's afraid of what you know. What if, instead of running, you simply told your story publicly? No one would believe a woman like me over a man like him." "They might with the right evidence." A plan was forming in Ryker's mind. "Did Sullivan ever give you anything? Letters, gifts that could prove your connection?" Sophia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes. Letters, a few small pieces of jewelry. I kept them as insurance, I suppose." She disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with a small metal box. "Everything is here." Inside were several letters addressed to Sophia in an elegant hand, signed simply J, but with details that clearly established the nature of their relationship. There was also a gold locket with Sullivan's initials engraved inside, and receipts for payments made to Sophia during her time in Denver. "This could be enough," Ryker said. "Not to have him arrested for the attack, perhaps, but certainly enough to make your story credible and to destroy his marriage and standing in town if it became public. What are you suggesting we do with this? Take it to the meeting?" Don't reveal it immediately, let them make their accusations first. Then, when Sullivan thinks he's won, present this evidence, not as a threat, but as your defense. Make it clear that you've kept his secret all this time despite his attempts to drive you away, but that you won't be silent if they try to take your home. Sophia considered the plan, turning the locket over in her hands. It's risky. If it fails, we'll have shown our hand for nothing. Sometimes the only way forward is through the fire, Ryker said softly. She looked up at him, searching his face. Why are you doing this, Ryker? You could ride away, leave all this behind. Your reputation intact, your future secure. He took her hands in his, the locket caught between their palms. Because some things are worth fighting for. He paused, gathering courage for words he'd never spoken before. Because I love you, Sophia Miller, and I'm tired of running from what matters. Sophia's breath caught, her eyes widening. For a heartbeat, Ryker feared he'd said too much, too soon. Then she reached up, her hand gentle against his cheek. I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I do. The meeting was held in Greeley's town hall, a modest building that served as church, courtroom, and community gathering place. By the time Ryker and Sophia arrived, the room was nearly full. Word of the emergency session had spread quickly, drawing curious townspeople eager for drama. Miss Watson met them at the door, her expression grim but determined. Half the town is here, she murmured. Sullivan has been busy spreading his poison. Inside, the town council, 5 men including Thornton, the mayor, and 3 business owners sat at a long table at the front of the room. Sullivan stood nearby, his wife Elizabeth at his side, looking pale and confused. Sheriff Collins stood by the door, uncomfortable but dutiful. Conversations hushed as Ryker and Sophia entered, followed by speculative whispers. Ryker placed a protective hand at the small of Sophia's back as they moved to the empty chairs before the council table. Mayor Harrison, a thin man with mutton chop whiskers, called the meeting to order. We are convened tonight to address concerns regarding the moral character of our community, he began pompously. Specifically, allegations concerning Miss Sophia Miller and her activities. And what exactly am I alleged to have done? Sophia asked, her voice clear in the suddenly quiet room. Thornton leaned forward, his jowls quivering with righteous indignation. It has come to the council's attention that you previously worked as a prostitute in Denver and that you have continued to entertain men here in Greeley. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sophia's back stiffened, but her voice remained steady. The first part of that statement is true. The second is a lie. More murmurs, louder this time. Mayor Harrison raised a hand for silence. You admit to being a fallen woman. I admit to having worked in a house in Denver for 3 years, yes. I came to Greeley to leave that life behind to build an honest future for myself. Yet you deliberately concealed your past from the good people of this town, Thornton pressed. I sought privacy, not deception, Sophia countered. I've lived quietly, earned my living through honest work, sewing, laundry, gardening. I've bothered no one. James Sullivan stepped forward. That's not entirely true, is it, Miss Miller? You've made certain overtures to married men in town. Ryker felt Sophia tense beside him, but she maintained her composure. That is categorically false, Mr. Sullivan. I have never approached any married man in Greeley. Yet here you sit with this cowboy, Sullivan gestured dismissively at Ryker, who threatened me on your behalf. What are we to make of that arrangement? Before Ryker could respond, Miss Watson stood from her seat in the audience. If I may address the council. Mayor Harrison nodded reluctantly. Proceed, Miss Watson, but be brief. I've known Miss Miller since she arrived in Greeley, Miss Watson began. She has been nothing but honest and hardworking in my observation. When she fell ill recently from a knife wound, I might add, inflicted by an unknown attacker. Mr. Faulkner paid for her medical care and lodging at my boarding house during her recovery. Their relationship has been above reproach. A knife wound. The mayor looked surprised. Was this reported to the sheriff? It was, Sophia said. Though little investigation followed, Sheriff Collins shifted uncomfortably. There was no clear evidence of who might have attacked Miss Miller. I suggest, Sullivan interjected smoothly, that Miss Miller's injury may have resulted from a dispute with a client. I've had no clients in Greeley, Sophia said firmly. I left that life behind in Denver. Sullivan's smile was cold. Yet you brought your Denver connections with you, did you not? The moment had come. Sophia reached into her reticule, withdrawing the small metal box. Perhaps you'd care to explain what you mean by connections, Mr. Sullivan. A flash of alarm crossed Sullivan's face. I merely meant your reputation, your history. I think you meant something more specific. Sophia opened the box, removing one of the letters. Like this correspondence, perhaps, addressed to me at Miss Loretta's establishment in Denver, signed by you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth Sullivan went very still beside her husband. That's a forgery, Sullivan stammered, his face draining of color. Is it? Sophia handed the letter to Mayor Harrison. There are several more, along with gifts and receipts. I've kept them as a reminder of a life I was determined to leave behind. I never intended to use them, never threatened to expose your secret, despite your attempts to drive me from my home. What is she talking about, James? Elizabeth's voice was barely audible, but in the hushed room it carried. Sullivan rounded on Sophia, his composure shattered. You deceitful whore, after everything I did for you, after you paid for my services in Denver, you mean? Sophia's voice was steady. Yes, you did. And when I chose to leave that life, to rebuild somewhere I thought was far from you, you discovered me here and panicked. You demanded I leave, threatened me when I refused. This is absurd, Sullivan sputtered, looking to Thornton for support. She's trying to deflect from her own immoral conduct. The letter appears genuine, Mayor Harrison said, examining it closely. As does the receipt made out to a J. Sullivan for services rendered at Miss Loretta's establishment. He looked up, his expression grave. Mr. Sullivan, is this your signature? Sullivan's eyes darted around the room, seeking escape and finding none. That is, it was a youthful indiscretion before my marriage. It's dated last year, the mayor pointed out, after your wedding to Miss Thornton. Elizabeth Sullivan made a small, choked sound and turned to her father. Papa! Thornton's face had gone purple with rage, though whether directed at Sullivan or Sophia wasn't immediately clear. This meeting concerns Miss Miller's moral character, not my son-in-law's private affairs. I think they've become rather public affairs now, Miss Watson observed dryly. Ryker spoke for the first time since the meeting began. It seems to me that Miss Miller has been honest about her past, while others have been less forthcoming. He looked directly at Sullivan. Including about who might have attacked her with a knife 3 months ago, shortly after she refused yet another demand to leave town. Sullivan's face contorted. You can't prove anything. Perhaps not conclusively, Ryker agreed, but the timing is interesting, isn't it? And your motive is now clear to everyone in this room. Mayor Harrison cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the turn the meeting had taken. This is a serious allegation, Mr. Sullivan. It's a lie, Sullivan insisted, though with less conviction. She's trying to save herself by destroying me. No, Sophia said quietly. I'm trying to defend my right to live in peace in my own home. I've never threatened you with exposure, James, despite your attempts to ruin me. All I've ever wanted was to be left alone to build a new life. Elizabeth Sullivan turned to her husband, tears streaming down her face. How could you?" Without waiting for an answer, she fled the room, her father following after casting a venomous glare at both Sullivan and Sophia. In the silence that followed, Mayor Harrison examined the remaining letters and items from Sophia's box. Finally, he looked up. "It seems, Miss Miller, that your situation is more complex than initially presented to this council." "I've never denied my past," Sophia replied. "But I came to Greeley for a fresh start, not to cause trouble or revive old connections." One of the other council members, a shopkeeper named Davis, leaned forward. "The fact remains, Miss Miller, that your presence in our community has caused disruption." "Through no fault of her own," Ryker pointed out. "She was living quietly until others chose to make her past public knowledge." The council members exchanged glances. Mayor Harrison sighed. "Perhaps it would be best if we adjourned to consider this matter privately." "If I may," Miss Watson interjected. "Before you deliberate, I'd like to remind the council that Greeley was founded on principles of temperance, education, and opportunity. Many of us came west for second chances. Are we now to deny that same chance to Miss Miller because of judgments about her past?" Her words seemed to strike a chord with several council members. After a moment, Mayor Harrison nodded. "A fair point, Miss Watson. The council will consider all aspects of this situation." The meeting was adjourned, with the council withdrawing to the small antechamber behind the main hall. James Sullivan, abandoned by his wife and father-in-law, slipped out a side door, avoiding the curious and judgmental stares of the townsfolk. Ryker and Sophia remained seated, awaiting the council's decision. Around them, the crowd buzzed with whispered conversations, many glancing their way with expressions ranging from sympathy to continued suspicion. "That was brave," Ryker said quietly, taking Sophia's trembling hand in his. "I'm not sure brave is the right word," she replied. "Desperate, perhaps. No, you stood your ground, told the truth, defended your right to build a new life. That's courage." Sophia leaned slightly against his shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. "What will they decide, do you think? Hard to say. But whatever happens, we'll face it together." The council's deliberation lasted nearly an hour. When they finally returned, the mayor's expression was solemn but no longer hostile. "Miss Miller," he began, "this council has carefully considered the evidence and testimony presented tonight. While we do not condone your previous occupation, we acknowledge that you have conducted yourself with propriety since arriving in Greeley, and that the accusations of continuing immoral behavior appear to be unfounded." Relief washed over Sophia's face, though she maintained her composure. "Thank you, Mayor." "Furthermore," Harrison continued, "the suggestion that your attacker might have been motivated by personal vendettas rather than moral outrage is concerning. Sheriff Collins has been instructed to reopen the investigation into that incident." The sheriff nodded, looking both uncomfortable and determined. "Yes, sir." As for Mr. Sullivan's role in this matter, the mayor's expression hardened slightly. "That is a personal matter for him and his family to address. But this council will not be used as a tool for personal vendettas or to conceal impropriety behind a mask of moral concern." Thornton had returned to the meeting without his daughter, his face still flushed with anger. At the mayor's words, he started to object, then thought better of it and subsided into sullen silence. "Miss Miller, you are free to continue living and working in Greeley," Harrison concluded. "This council has no grounds to interfere with your private affairs, so long as you continue to conduct yourself within the bounds of the law." Murmurs of both approval and disapproval rippled through the audience, but the decision was made. The meeting was adjourned, and gradually the townspeople filed out, many casting curious glances at Sophia and Ryker as they passed. Miss Watson approached them, her face wreathed in smiles. Justice prevails, it seems, even in Greeley. Thanks in no small part to your support, Sophia said, embracing the older woman. I won't forget your kindness, Miss Watson. You stood up for yourself, Miss Watson corrected gently. I merely reminded some stubborn men of their own principles. She glanced between Sophia and Ryker. Now, will you two be returning to the cabin tonight, or would you prefer rooms at my boarding house? The hour is late. Ryker looked to Sophia, leaving the decision to her. After a moment's consideration, she smiled. I think I'd like to go home, my real home. The ride back to the cabin was quiet, both Ryker and Sophia lost in their own thoughts about the evening's events and what might follow. The moon lit their way, casting long shadows through the pines as they approached the small clearing where Sophia's cabin stood, peaceful and undisturbed. As they unsaddled their horses and carried their few belongings inside, a sense of rightness settled over Ryker. This modest cabin in the Colorado wilderness, with its books and quilts and vegetable garden, had begun to feel more like home than anywhere he'd been in years. And the woman who built this life from nothing, who had fought for her right to a second chance, she had become the center of that feeling. Inside, Sophia lit a lamp and built up the fire, dispelling the evening chill. When she turned to face Ryker, her expression was one of cautious hope. We won for now, she said. But Sullivan and Thornton won't forget this humiliation easily. No, Ryker agreed. They won't. But they've been exposed. Sullivan's reputation is in tatters, and Thornton will be too busy trying to salvage his family's standing to worry much about you for a while. And after that while, by then, we'll have figured out our next move. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Together, if that's what you want. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. I meant what I said at the meeting. I came to Greeley for a fresh start, a chance to build something of my own. She paused, but I never expected that would include finding someone to build it with. Life has a way of surprising us, Ryker said softly. Yes, it does. She squeezed his hands. I've been alone so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. We'll figure it out as we go. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. No rush, no pressure, we have time. Sophia's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Yes, she agreed, we have time. That night, Ryker slept inside the cabin for the first time, on the small settee that was too short for his frame but felt more comfortable than any bedroll under the stars. In the quiet hours before dawn, he listened to Sophia's soft breathing from the bed across the room and knew with absolute certainty that his days of drifting were over. The following weeks saw gradual but significant changes in their lives. Sheriff Collins, perhaps seeking to make amends for his previous inaction, investigated Sophia's attack with renewed diligence. While no conclusive evidence linked Sullivan to the crime, the banker's son-in-law found himself under intense scrutiny, his movements monitored, his reputation in tatters. Elizabeth Sullivan filed for divorce, a scandalous move in 1878, but one supported by her father once the full extent of James's deception became clear. Sullivan left town shortly thereafter, heading west with rumors of gambling debts and other unsavory connections following in his wake. For Sophia, life in Greeley slowly improved. While some townsfolk continued to keep their distance, others, influenced by Miss Watson's staunch support and the council's decision, began to accept her presence. Her sewing business grew, with several prominent wives discreetly seeking her skilled services for special occasions. Ryker found work at a nearby ranch, his experience with cattle and horses making him a valuable hand. The position allowed him to return to Sophia's cabin most evenings while earning enough to contribute to their shared expenses. They moved carefully in their relationship, both wary of rushing what was still new and fragile. Ryker continued to sleep on the settee, despite Sophia's increasingly pointed remarks about his obvious discomfort. They were learning each other, building trust day by day, discovering the rhythms of a shared life neither had experienced before. Fall gave way to winter, the Colorado mountains disappearing behind curtains of snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. The cabin, snug and warm with the two of them inside, became a haven against the bitter cold outside. On Christmas Eve, Ryker returned from town with supplies and a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. He found Sophia at the stove, her cheeks flushed from the heat as she prepared their evening meal. "Smells wonderful," he said, setting down his parcels and stomping snow from his boots. Sophia smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just a simple stew, but I found some dried apples at the back of the pantry. Thought I might make a pie for tomorrow." "Sounds perfect." He hesitated, then held out the small package. "Got you something for Christmas." Surprise and pleasure lit her features. "Ryker, you didn't have to, wanted to." He shifted, suddenly nervous. "It's not much." Sophia untied the string carefully, folding back the paper to reveal a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a single small sapphire. Her breath caught. "Ryker." "It doesn't have to mean anything you don't want it to," he said quickly. "Could just be a gift, or it could be a promise, or—" He took a deep breath. "It could be more if you wanted." Sophia looked up at him, tears gathering in her eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes." The word came out rougher than he intended, heavy with emotion. "I love you, Sophia. These past months living here with you, it's been the happiest I've ever been." "I know it's soon, and if you need more time—" "Yes," she interrupted, a tear spilling down her cheek. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief and joy washed through him. "Really?" In answer, Sophia took the ring from its box and held it out to him. "Put it on me." With fingers that weren't entirely steady, Ryker slid the ring onto her left hand. It fit perfectly, the sapphire catching the firelight. "I wasn't sure of the size," he admitted. "Had to guess. It's perfect." Sophia looked down at the ring, then back up at him. "I never thought I'd have this. A home, someone who loves me despite knowing everything about me, a future that feels real." Ryker pulled her close, his heart full to bursting. "It is real, I promise you that." They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in Miss Watson's parlor. The ceremony was small, attended only by Miss Watson herself, a few friends from the ranch where Ryker worked, and to everyone's surprise, Mayor Harrison and his wife. "Every community needs good people," the mayor said gruffly when Sophia thanked him for coming. "People who stand by their principles, who work hard, who treat others with dignity." He glanced at Ryker. "You two seem to qualify." Coming from a man who had initially been prepared to run Sophia out of town, it was high praise indeed. Spring brought new beginnings. With their combined savings, Ryker and Sophia purchased the adjacent parcel of land, doubling the size of their property. Ryker built a proper barn and corral, while Sophia expanded her garden and started a small chicken coop. They worked side by side, building not just structures but a life one day, one choice at a time. In the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, or by the fire reading from Sophia's books, their conversations ranging from cattle prices to philosophy, from childhood memories to dreams for the future. "You ever miss it?" Sophia asked one evening as they watched stars emerge above the pines. "The open trail, the freedom to go wherever the wind takes you." Ryker considered the question, his arm around her shoulders. Sometimes I miss the stars over the plains of Texas, he admitted. The vastness of it, the silence. But not the loneliness, never that. Sophia leaned into him. I worried when you first asked me to marry you that you might come to regret giving up that freedom for this. She gestured at the cabin, the small homestead they were building together. This is a different kind of freedom, Ryker said simply. The freedom to build something lasting, to wake up each morning knowing exactly where I belong and who I belong with. She smiled up at him, the last traces of doubt finally fading from her eyes. I love you, Ryker Faulkner. And I love you, Sophia Faulkner. The name still gave him a thrill to say. Always will. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges. Their homestead grew a larger cabin built with Ryker's own hands, a small but productive herd of cattle, orchards of apple and cherry trees. Sophia's sewing business flourished, with her quilts eventually gaining recognition beyond Greeley's boundaries. Greeley itself changed too, growing and evolving as the frontier gradually gave way to settlement and civilization. Some old prejudices remained, but new faces and ideas brought greater acceptance, particularly as Ryker and Sophia proved themselves valuable members of the community through hard work and quiet generosity. In the spring of 1881, their family expanded with the birth of their son, Daniel. 2 years later, their daughter Elizabeth joined them, named in a gesture of reconciliation toward the woman whose life had been appended alongside Sophia's in the Sullivan affair. Elizabeth Sullivan, now remarried and living in Denver, surprised them with a visit after learning of the namesake. Life takes unexpected turns, she told Sophia as they watched the children play in the yard. Sometimes painful ones, but I've found that even the worst betrayals can lead to something better if you're brave enough to keep moving forward. Sophia, thinking of the long journey from Boston to Denver to Greeley, from desperation to love, could only agree. On a warm summer evening in 1888, Ryker and Sophia sat on the porch of their home, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. At 42 and 34, respectively, they had weathered a decade of marriage, building a life neither could have imagined in their solitary pasts. You ever think about it? Ryker asked, his hand finding hers in the fading light. How different our lives might have been if I hadn't ridden into Greeley that day. Sophia squeezed his fingers, the gold band on her left hand catching the last rays of sunset. Sometimes. But then, I remember something my mother used to say before everything fell apart, that life has a way of bringing us exactly where we need to be, even when the path seems darkest. Ryker nodded, watching as Daniel helped his little sister catch a particularly elusive firefly, their laughter carrying across the homestead that had grown from Sophia's humble cabin. I think she was right, he said softly. So do I. Sophia leaned against his shoulder, contentment in every line of her body. So do I. As night fell over the Colorado wilderness they had made their home, stars emerged one by one above the pines, the same stars that had witnessed their separate journeys, their chance meeting, their choice to stand together against those who would judge and condemn. Now those stars shone down on something neither had dared to hope for in their previous lives. A family, a home, a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something enduring and true. For a town that had once refused Sophia medical care for her shame, for a community that had tried to drive her away, this outcome would have seemed impossible. But in the end, it wasn't the town's judgment that mattered, it was the courage of a woman determined to build a new life, and the heart of a cowboy who recognized true worth when others saw only the past. Together, they had written a new story, one of redemption, second chances, and a love strong enough to overcome the harshest judgments of a harsh time and place. And in that story, they had found not just survival, but happiness beyond measure.